MusicalTalk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of MusicalTalk. I'm Thos and like President John F. Kennedy, I'm proud to be able to stand up and say, Ich bin ein Irving Berliner, which is rather apropos of nothing, because what we're going to be talking about today here on MusicalTalk is the return of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, the biggest and greatest arts festival in the world. It's already opened and it runs all the way up to the bank holiday at the end of August. So you've got about 3 weeks to try and catch it. And if for some reason you can't make it to Edinburgh, don't forget MusicalTalk will be continuing its always extensive coverage of all the musicals we can possibly push into the days that we're there. And to celebrate the opening of the Fringe, today we're going to be looking at 3 shows that you can see. We'll be touching on the House of Edgar, Chwedl, Tales from Wales, and the subject of our main interview today, World in Progress, by an old friend of this programme, Colm Molloy, the up-and-coming composer and expert on Stephen Sondheim. So, with a packed programme, it's probably time to get the ball rolling. And that ball in question is, of course, that beautiful blue marble that hangs in space, Earth. You may have heard of it, you're probably standing on it now. And if you're not, then I can only assume that you're a happy alien listening in to learn more about Earth culture from planet Tharg. So, my salutations to you. But for the rest of us, i.e. Earthlings, let's talk about World in Progress. It's a brand new musical song cycle that explores our ever-changing relationship with the Earth. It observes how life is affected by and can affect the world around us and how this has changed over the years and will continue to. The planet is perhaps the only thing that unites us all as a species, the one common denominator. And so this piece experiments with an eclectic mix of song styles, musical theatre, choral, folk, funk, soul, electronic, jazz and more. Well, so says the online blurb at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe website. But I wanted to find out more. So I was lucky enough to get to see that show when it previewed in an early version in London only a few weeks ago. And I was impressed. It was by no means finished, but what I saw I liked a great deal. So I sat down with its composer and writer, Colm Molloy, who you will remember from previous episodes on Stephen Sondheim, to talk about his work in progress, World in Progress. And in no particular order, throughout this conversation, you'll also hear very short extracts of the live recording made of that preview show, just to give you a little bit of a taster. So we'll hear one of those first, and then afterwards, the very lovely Colm Molloy.
Give your tick out palpitation. Tell the world your proclamation. The earth is gonna rise. You're cutting down the plastic. The earth is gonna rise. And the ice caps are fantastic. The earth is gonna rise. Don't blame those greenhouse gases when civilization passes. Put on your sunglasses. The earth is gonna rise. What do you say? What do you say? Earth's gonna rise. Rise, rise, rise. What do you say? We have to raise. We're gonna die.
Colm, hello. Lovely to see you again. Lovely to hear you again, as we're about to do now.
Pleasure as always.
Now, as we are talking, Edinburgh is looming heavily, and you have just previewed your new Edinburgh show here in London with an expectation of it going up to Edinburgh very quickly for the festival.
Yes.
And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So tell me a little bit about it in broad brush terms, and then we'll start drilling down. Just, I think it's got one of those very arresting titles, which immediately drew me in when I saw it in the catalogue, but also it lets you know there's a kind of an underbed of humour going on, whatever the thing is about.
Oh, good.
That's the build-up. What's it called?
Well, it's a song cycle called World in Progress.
So that's World in Progress.
World-
I just want to drill down a bit on that, because
Sure.
people may or may not be aware of this, but there's a hell of a lot of shows that go up to Edinburgh every year, normally by comedians, called Work in Progress.
Indeed.
So
yes.
I really like taking something which is a known fringe title particularly and giving it a slight twist.
Yeah.
But also it's resonant of so much more as well.
Yes, it is. The kind of impetus to write this show came off the back of me wanting to expand my repertoire as a songwriter, a composer, lyricist, and what better way to indulge myself in such an exercise by seeing how well I could write songs of varying styles. And the idea of where we are progressing as a species seemed to be not only topical for now, but topical for years to come and for the past. And I felt it necessary with my mild political, I don't know what
Slant?
I'd call it. Yeah, exactly. To challenge the audience with an evening of entertaining but also ironic songs at how us humans and the world interact.
I love the sense of irony, because I've seen it, as I say, in the preview show in London. And irony, I think, is the right term to describe the principal way that you cast your mirror on the story that you're telling, which is, well, basically, I suppose you're taking the word progress and showing us two meanings of it, aren't you, in some senses?
Sure.
As in that progress means development, but development can also mean damage.
Yes.
And so progress has these two terms. One is very, a progressive is a forward-thinking person, a progressive society is a forward-moving society, and yet at the same time human progress brings damage in its wake.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that sounds very dull and worthy, but that is essentially, this is double meaning in the word of in your title, which I think you exploit fully in your,
good.
I'm going to say narrative structure, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. But, the tale of which you're telling in its broadest sense.
Sure.
But also it does infuse all your songs as well, and or many of them as well.
Mm-hmm.
But let's start at the beginning. You said song cycle.
Yes.
I've also seen it described as a revue. R-E-V-U-E.
Yes.
Care to make any observation about the gap between those two words? It's 3 words technically, but we'll take it as read.
Sure. Oh gosh, you throw me.
But not from the train.
No, very kind. Yes, I mean, I very much feel like I'm at a stage professionally where, as I said before, wanting to expand on who I am creatively, and much in the same way that Jason Robert Brown and Adam Gettle wrote song cycles relatively close to my age, I guess mid to late 20s for them. It's an exercise for me as someone who is a lone collaborator. I collaborate with myself, and in this case with dead poets when extra lyrics are concerned. So I guess it's a combination of a review in that what we have are a variety of songs which in some ways are not related, and then there is a through narrative between songs which can be extrapolated. And yes, I hadn't really thought of it as either a song cycle or a review, but I guess it is kind of both and neither.
Well, I wonder then if the difference here might actually be that the review is the best way to describe the narrative in the sense of the structure, the arc, whereas song cycle is the method by which you have produced this review.
Yes.
I know it's a nice distinction, but actually, it's literally a song cycle in the sense there's no dialogue.
No.
So you do, as an audience, draw everything that you can from the visual and audio stimulus that you're giving us, but it isn't in the form of words except we're lyrics.
Sure.
Usually, most of us, I think, would expect dialogue in most shows, but you don't in a song cycle. So it's quite an interesting discipline, I think, for the writer, but it's also a very interesting discipline for the listener, because one has to. It's all about interpretation. So let's talk then about narrative. And we're using narrative or book in this broadest possible sense.
Yes.
How would you describe it first? Because it's non-traditional, isn't it, in that sense?
It's experimental in the lightest term.
It's engagingly experimental.
Oh, good, thank you. Every song is essentially in a different style, and that was more some kind of ego trip for myself and a challenge I set myself as well.
But not a pastiche, I don't think.
Well, no, yeah, again, I hope not.
I got flavours rather than substitution, shall we say?
Oh, that's a relief. Because the previous show I wrote, which was definitely a kind of Weimar cabaret pastiche, was very reverential towards that period of the time. So much so that I think what I wanted was to completely move away from that and see if I could inhabit vernacular styles, but really try and help my own identity ease out somehow. So firstly, every song is in a different style. I guess we start it does work chronologically, so there is plain chant music, there is something that feels reminiscent of medieval or Tudor-esque music, and then we seemingly accelerate or move back and forth between different song styles. There's a kind of funk, jazzy type number. There is a more contemporary Adam Gettle feel number. There is a gospel number. And each number tries in some way to explore our relationship with the earth and how that has changed or how it's stayed the same, and not making a comment on whether that's good or bad, but just exploring the potentials of those ideas.
Now that's once again an interesting distinction, isn't it? Not because you're right, it doesn't come with an editorial voice.
No.
It is for the audience to take away what they think it's about and what they think the message, in speech marks, is, if they do think there is a message. Sure. And yet at the same time it is trying to say something, isn't it? It's certainly trying to illustrate something, at least. I suspect that might be a better way of putting it. But that is a distinction. You're trying to draw people's attention to an issue, but then allow them to take from what you're offering them their take on that issue. So it's almost leading the horse to water and then allowing it to drink as much or as little as it wants.
Well, yeah, I think so.
But that leaves a lot of responsibility on the audience, doesn't it? There's no criticism. So it's a big interpretive piece, I suppose, is where I'm drawing.
It is. I don't enjoy force-feeding an audience.
Good.
And I think a lot of theatre today is either completely fantasy-like and is about escape. It's all complete escapism, or it is very, very topical and very, very prescient.
Sometimes didactic.
Yeah, and I wanted to be neither of those things. Yeah. What I was hoping to achieve was presenting to an aware audience that everything we're doing currently is in some ways all in vain, and maybe that comes as a sobering message to them that, there's no point in doing anything, or maybe it comes as a liberating idea that there's so much potential and everything doesn't matter, and that kind of thing.
It's odd in that sense, isn't it? Because it's more of a memento mori.
Yes.
But for humankind rather than for ourselves, although obviously that's implied as well.
Sure.
So this is a show essentially which is all of time in the making, because it is essentially, well, it seems to start, doesn't it, from a human experience, so as you say, plain chant. Now, I'm going to say something again to you, and I'd like to explore it a little bit further, something I said to you on the night when I saw your preview, which is that I find, because I've seen a number of your works now, and I always find them engaging. I find them very easy to connect with, and yet, I say very easy, but they are all interpretive. And I find, as I suspect a lot of people do, that if it's not presented to one on a plate, if someone gives you an opening number for a musical, as we all would understand an opening number for a musical, the chorus come out, give you a bit of context, one or two of the characters will come out, perhaps give you a little bit of character about themselves, whilst adding to the context, and then alluding to what the plot's going to be. That's a very standard opening musical, and we're used to it, as you say, being served up on a plate. Lyrics, music, working together to do that. You're classically trained, you write classical music as well as show music, and the fusion thereof in some senses. I find your music very sensory, and that is not normally how I respond to music. But actually it's partly because you're not afraid of using the musical opportunities of the voice beyond the lyric. And you start this show with our chorus of two chaps and three lasses, who are the cast, singing a song which has no actual lyrics. And yet it's beguiling and haunting, and I think there's almost nothing more that you can do, or nothing more that I can do, because I can't engage with that intellectually at that stage. I have to sort of lie back and let the beauty of the sound wash over me and allow that to sort of lull me into whatever an emotional mood that creates. And that's not, as I say, my usual way of responding. And I will say I've had this before with your work. We haven't spoken about this on MusicalTalk, but you wrote a fantastic piece of music which was about the sort of the coagulation and creation of sound and language, which certainly at the beginning of that piece works in a similar basis. It's disparate sounds, sometimes letters, g, being repeated and things like that. But actually, the way that one engages with it has to be, I think, sensory first. And yet, I know that you were surprised at that. I spent quite a lot of time elaborating why I had that response, and that I had that response, and how I had it, and why.
Sure.
But you expressed surprise that your work could be interpreted particularly in that way.
Well,
because obviously it does have ideas behind it. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Discuss, show you're working.
It's very flattering that it has that effect. It's definitely my intention to lull audience members into perhaps a false sense of security, and in some ways that opening material is almost a lullaby of sorts.
Well, it's warming and comforting.
It is.
But in an oddly alien way as well. The lack of lyrics make it one step apart.
Sure, and if I were to break it down harmonically, it's something that is perhaps a bit unusual to the ears, especially to a theatre-going audience who's expecting to see something musical theatre.
Just hands!
Yeah, exactly. And I enjoy that notion of subverting ideas
and expectations. Quite.
Yes, exactly. And I think what my intention was to have that for a couple of minutes and then instantly subvert that once again. So it's kind of it's almost out of my own. It really is a bit of an ego trip. It's my own satisfaction and my own pleasure. How long can I sustain an idea before I get bored, and then go to something completely different? Really.
But that's rug pulling, isn't it, as well? Obviously, but you also need that narratively, because actually, if it was more of the same, if that musical piece sort of phased into something that was a development of it rather than a handbrake turn, then actually people might not wake up from it.
Sure.
If you've lulled people into that sense of comfort, then it's easy to stay in a sense of comfort. You do need a jolt. That's what I like about your work. But actually, that it's back to this interpretive thing, that you are happy to present evidence for other people then to make something of.
Sure.
And before we were even recording this, you were talking about non-traditional, non-linear narratives.
Mm-hmm.
The progressive story, but not necessarily from A to B to B to C to B, all the way through to Z, or Omega if you want to take it further. But sometimes a little sidestep, or a step back and a step forward in terms of chronology, or something like that. So, once again, is this the wrong footing element?
No. I mean, I think it's perhaps how my mind works, or perhaps all our minds work. We were talking.
I can assure you, not everyone's mind works.
I mean, even before we started recording, we were talking about Proust, and following on from him, we have people like Joyce and Samuel Beckett, and their whole notion is that the mind is not a linear thing, and it is something that relates itself to things that seem very left field or very lateral. And I think I probably have a mind like that, and I enjoy finding comparisons between things that often don't seem similar or related in any way. And perhaps what comes with that is my desire to create things that seemingly at the time divert attention or seem like a sidestep, but perhaps they are all a big umbrella, and perhaps in some ways World in Progress is a song cycle umbrella.
Well, there's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
We haven't had much need for an umbrella in London recently, but
No.
That's very interesting. I also like the idea that, you were talking about, I mean, ultimately you were talking about sort of synaptic impulses, weren't you, in a way?
Yeah,
but actually, where parts of the brain connect with other parts of the brain. But if the more broadly and interestingly you can do that, you can travel, you can tell the same story in parallel with itself, I suppose.
Sure.
But actually, why take the main path if the country roads are prettier?
Sure.
I think a wolf will now come up and tell me a song warning Little Red Riding Hood, or suggesting Little Red Riding Hood might want to take one of those side paths. But that's a different musical again, I think.
It is, yes.
But I do like, why go for the obvious when you can parallel line it? I can think of no other better way of describing it.
Sure, and I think a lot of it is also, I hope it doesn't come across that I want to leave my audience in the dark, but I also do enjoy giving them what they want momentarily, and then, as you said, pulling the rug.
But ultimately creating a whole, which then is, I mean, your shows, and this is a good example of it, are shows that you take away the ideas from. So it doesn't stop when the last note dies down and the applaudience have expressed their satisfaction.
Nice portmanteau.
Yes, I'd like that. Yes, no. Yes, when the audience have applauded. But people will leave the room, as they must, because there'll probably be another show in 10 minutes. But they won't leave the show intellectually, because it will stay with them, I think.
Yes, I think another problem I have with I definitely appreciate theatre that tries to get a message across, but so much of theatre that tries to do that says all it needs to say, and so audience members feel like they don't need to do anything afterwards.
This is the message, now let me reinforce it, rather than saying, here are some clues, can you guess what the message is?
Yes. And if anything I write, if I have a kind of mantra for the things I write, it's to create change beyond the theatre, and that's probably a big aim or a big thing to ask from an audience or from myself as a writer. But I think if what I write can have a social or a kind of function beyond itself, then it's doing what it should do.
This is it's almost Reithian then, isn't it? It's educate, inform and entertain. Well, you want to entertain, yes, but you also want to get people thinking and, as you say, let it, at whatever level, infuse their thoughts and maybe their lives.
Sure.
Yeah. I think that's fascinating. Let's talk about the score then, which is the glory of the piece.
Thank you.
Your composition skills are, I think, tremendous. Now, some of the songs, as we said, are almost audio only.
Yep.
But most of them have lyrics in the usual way. You are the creator of some of the lyrics. There are other collaborators amongst, as you say, the world of... You've used quotations and poetry, if that helps, in order to illustrate points. Those are two very different schools. Writing your own lyrics, you are fluid. Taking someone else's lyrics, they are solidified. They're already handed down to history. You are embedding them and bedding them, I suppose, musically.
Yeah.
Do you find that your creative process is different for the different styles? You don't write your lyrics before you write your music, though, do you?
Well, it's very interesting. I
shall be the judge of that. It will be, don't worry.
Again, it's all rather selfishly me wanting to see how well I can do said challenge I set myself. My previous musical was my own music and my own lyrics, and perhaps very heavily influenced by Sondheim and his dexterity of language.
Well, we've mentioned the show before on the programme, you might as well say.
Yes, Forbidden Fruit, yes.
Absolutely, we've heard a song from it.
Yes, you have. And I wanted to branch out and see if I could do more than just be clever and artsy with words, just so I wasn't a one-trick pony, as it were.
Yes.
And so much of being a songwriter is using found objects and creating and turning them into something new. You are quite right. It was a different process for each song. A lot of the square poems that I have used lended themselves to very straight settings. A lot of the purpley prosaic texts I found lended themselves to more through composed, free-flowing music. And then off of that informed my own lyric writing, which at first, or specifically in Forbidden Fruit, was very, very wordy, a habit I've since tried to shake.
Yeah.
And so I'm now kind of veering off into a more abstract, poetic, not always literal sense. Yes.
But that's also where the form of a song cycle will help, though, won't it? Because you can't rely on being wordy. I mean, you can in lyrics, but you can't then back it up with dialogue to...
No, of course.
To really, to ram home a point or even to contrast it, actually. You can be subtle or non-subtle using words, obviously. I mean, that's the great thing about language. But
sure.
I think you keep telling yourself off, setting yourself the challenge. But what would be the point of writing a song if you weren't setting yourself a challenge or a show? If you were doing it without that, it would be a hack job.
Sure.
And this doesn't feel to me like a hack job.
Oh, good.
So, but let's talk about those stylistic choices then that you've used to illustrate the points whether they be other people's points through poetry or your own and the general thrust. I said I got flavours. I got plenty of flavours. I'm going to say the two ones that come immediately to mind. Sondheim is always going to be a flavour that you offer because he's one of your favourite flavours.
Oh, he is,
He
yes.
is the English mustard.
He ages well.
Yes. But also, there was a lovely moment of almost pure Gershwin. I mean, not real Gershwin, obviously, because it wasn't lifted, but I was getting... Are we
talking George or Ira here?
I'm talking George. But I will say, Sondheim and Gershwin have, I think, a musical shared connection, which is the interesting use of chords. And this is speaking as a non-music, I'm a lay person when it comes to being able to describe musical things, but Gershwin has a very distinctive set of chord structures and sounds, it seems to me, that make his sound very distinctive from the 20s and 30s as opposed to his fellow composers of the period. You can tell a Gershwin compared to a Richard Rodgers, compared to a Cole Porter, because of, I think, his chord sounds, whether they be positive or blue. And I think Sondheim, particularly earlier Sondheim, funny enough, which I think is the end of his market that you most connect with. I could be wrong. Certainly, well, in Forbidden Fruit, I think you were...
There's lots of follies.
Well, that's still early Sondheim, isn't it?
Yeah,
I was thinking there's sort of what I would call purer Sondheim.
Okay.
Where you can see his working a bit more clearly. I'm not saying in any way that you've lifted things from these people, but the resonances of the chord usage reminded me very clearly of those composers.
Sure.
I don't know if you have a comment on that, because once again all I've done is ramble on about what I thought, but that sort of is what I do.
Well, I think I used to quite rebelliously try and steer clear of song forms, and I think it was definitely my intention to alienate the audience as much as possible, particularly with Forbidden Fruit, which, although it's in a very
which makes you vile, doesn't it?
Yeah,
in both senses of the word.
Thank you very much. It's although I was using a style that was palatable and accessible. I presented it in a way that was not easy to take in.
You are at the heart a Brechtian, aren't you?
I think I am.
Yes,
I really do.
Well, I can tell you are. Yes.
But I think what I have realised, and I've learnt to accept the song form, is it's an assimilation of vernacular style, and in the sense of theatre, a kind of ritualistic, or this is more relating to classical music, but people like Ives and Mahler regarded song or music as a combination of the vernacular and the divine. And I think that's a perfect way to describe what a musical theatre song is. You're combining song forms which are known to everybody and subverting essentially those into a way that you can fashion to get a point across. And
a higher calling almost.
Well, yeah, I think so.
To the divine.
Sure, you're transcending what the song form is to say something else. And I think Gershwin and Sondheim do those in very, very special ways. Gershwin's use of dissonance, particularly in Porgy and Bess, is very, very special, and I don't think really heard of in many other operas. It's remarkable.
Or elsewhere. Funny enough, Gershwin-esque music. A lot of Gershwin is used as a generic term for music that sounds like it comes from the 20s and 30s, and I've heard people who are otherwise quite expert using it very wrongly.
Yeah.
Because actually, I don't think there's an heir to Gershwin, except in the broadest sense. Everyone is the heir to someone who changes the rules. But actually, who's the second Gershwin? Couldn't tell you.
Sure.
I mean, you see a bit more with Sondheim. It would be unfair on the names that people do attribute to being the next Sondheim. But obviously, that is the paradigm people often play.
Yeah.
So they both set paradigms, but Gershwin doesn't have a follower. I just find that fascinating in its own right.
Sure. I think the remarkable thing as well is not only do they both write songs that work in a theatrical context, but I'm also Gershwin, but they can both be taken out of the context of the show, and what you still have is, I don't want to use the word product, but it's an object that it stands for itself within and out of the show.
Yes, I know what you're saying. In the old-fashioned parlance, you could take a song out and sing it, and it still makes some kind of sense or has some kind of worth outside of the context. As you say, easier for Gershwin, but he was writing in that way. He created his own integration.
And I mean, Tin Pan Alley was still a thing, and I think by the time Sondheim came around, it wasn't existent anymore as much.
Not in the same way.
No.
And certainly shows didn't borrow from it in the way that they used to. So, we were talking about Sondheim and Gershwin, flavours and feelings. I'm going to call it the Croker song. There's a song I thought was, I thought it was a lovely song. It's the song that, and I said this to you outside of this conversation, but if it has a parent who isn't you, then it's Summer Is A Coming In. It's a kind of sort of, I think you mentioned a medieval song earlier. This is sort of what it felt like. It felt like a sort of pastoral hymn to agrarian perfection on the face of it.
Yes.
Yeah. A world in which damage could occur.
Sure, yeah. It was definitely a nice moment of respite, I think, to create a song that was inoffensive and observational and very picturesque.
Evocative, actually, I think might be the word, yeah.
I think so. And also, I think compared to all of the other songs in the show, there are still a couple more to write.
Yeah. Well, the preview, forgive me, let's talk honestly. Your preview has shown you some areas where you need to do bits and pieces, and as you say, there's a couple of songs in terms of narrative, but at the preview you were very honest and you said, this is the way of helping this work in progress.
Exactly, yes, thank you very much. Yes, it's definitely the more simple of all the songs, and I think that was something I had to let myself do, lest the show veer off into complete complexity and chaos. Yeah. And I think it offers it's a nice kind of central kernel in the middle of the piece to have this very, very easy on the ears, folkish song.
Yeah. It also, I think it acts narratively as well as a kind of sort of still point from which, let's talk broadly in terms of, this isn't talking about your show, this is just talking about progress in the human sense. You can see humans struggling to find a kind of stable environment in which they can live and prosper, and then they reach it. And for many people, not everyone, but a lot of people sort of look back on some golden age of agrarian, pastoral pleasure.
Yes.
Even down to in social history, the 18th century grand ladies all dressed like they were Arcadian maidens. Very strange, really. Bearing in mind that was very far from the truth of the period. And then, of course, that's if you had this still point from which progress has attained what it ostensibly was looking for, but then has to go further. Where does progress go once it's achieved stability?
Yes.
Instability, presumably, and is that progress? That's almost in a sense the story of humanity, but it is certainly one of the contributory factors to your narrative arc.
Yes, well, it reminds me of the Alan Bennett line from the History Boys, where I can't remember the kind of matriarchal teacher's name, says decay is a kind of progress, and it always sticks with me, and I think it is true, whether people see that in a negative or positive way.
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it? Yes, once again, it's progress as progression.
Yes.
Rather than, as in the emphasis being on the gress, ironically, as in movement, as in egress and all that kind of stuff, rather than the pro, which is the positivity. But
yes.
This is not a time and a place for the linguistics. I hope.
Tune in next week.
Yes. Send me your essays. So, let's talk about the history of the piece in logistical construction.
Yes.
We are recording this at the tail end of July in a sweltering London. You're about to go to a sweltering Edinburgh in the next few weeks. When was this conceived as a show? Give us your timescales, because I know that you've been talking about it for a while, but putting on a show in an otherwise already busy life, as you have had, is a difficult thing. How have you been working your life, and why aren't you dead?
Oh, God. There's been a long gestation period. The first half of this year has been quite busy with other compositional projects, and I could only really put my eggs in my World in Progress basket around June time, which
is very tight, isn't it?
Very, very, very recent. People might be shocked at that, but I definitely need an immense
Not just
amount...
people, person. Me.
I definitely need an immense amount of pressure and a prolonged time thinking about what I'm going to do before I actually put pen to paper, and I definitely see it as part of the process, the thinking. And so once I felt suitably comfortable, frantically started to write things, and I think I was concerned at first that what I was doing was speed writing, and what would come out wouldn't have been well thought through. And I think that's the case for some things. I think a couple of things need refining here or there.
Of course.
But yes, it definitely seems to be my way of working at the moment, to work quickly and efficiently.
But based on a bed of thought and absorption, actually, into your conscious and presumably subconscious minds, because it's going to be working when you're doing other stuff, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Johnny Mercer was a great one for that.
Yes.
You know his story about when he was stuck on a lyric, he would put the song away in the sure knowledge that his subconscious would carry on beavering away at the back of his brain
Right, yeah.
when he was doing other things like eating porridge and going to the shops or whatever. And then eventually he would wake up one morning and an idea would present itself that would work. And I think that's a marvellous thing, to be able to sort of lock it away into your mental trunk. I'm not saying it works for everyone, but it is a way of taking you forward.
Yes.
Before you've started.
Yeah,
almost.
yeah. No, I definitely agree. Yes.
Oh, fine.
That's what I have to say.
So June is when you've got going on the composition, actually tangibly getting it down, but there's more to a show than that. You've got to assemble producers, directors, you've got to orchestrate, you've got to get the performers, you've got to get technical support. In your case, you booked a preview as well as also booking Edinburgh.
Yep.
You know, how did you delegate, you know, how did you work that through? How much of a one-man band are you?
Fortunately, I'm not a one-man band. I am a 2 to 3 man band. I guess the idea for this show came about in January, February, and I luckily have 2 good friends who are both very good at admin and very good at finding money.
They are friends to have, certainly in show business.
They are indeed. Yes. So we already had an Edinburgh slot secure and the Other Palace preview sorted by March.
Oh, good. So out of the way nice and early, actually, because that's speech marks, simple stuff in some sense, isn't it? Because it's been done before and it will be done again.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then we started casting in May. And then once we got the cast together, that was my cue to get going with the writing. And
now that's interesting. So you had it cast before you were writing. So you knew that you were going to be writing for 5 voices, or had you always envisaged 5 voices?
Well, we were hoping for 6.
Oh, right, okay. So it really did have an effect.
Yes, it did. I know this works for Sondheim as well, and it seems to work more for me if you know the voices you're writing for, or if you know a vague idea about range or what they can and can't do. It makes the writing process easier. It gives it. You need a certain level of things to pigeonhole you, or you need some hindrances.
I agree. Yes, funny enough, that conversation has come up before in relation to improvisation.
Yeah.
You know, you talk to any improviser and they say actually that trick that you see when they ask the audience to shout out a name of a show or some characteristic that should happen or something, or in a improvised musical, you know, a style or a form, they're in fact actually narrowing the field from almost impossible improvise about nothing to improvise about something. So actually barriers are really helpful in creativity, aren't they?
Oh yes, yeah.
Or not necessarily barriers, because barriers has a negative connotation, but actually yes, limits or ranges or whatever it is. So it's interesting to me that that it's true for what might be called a cognitive creative process.
Oh
as well
sure,
as an improvised one.
And the other thing we didn't touch on is the show is an actor-musician show, so all of the actors are accompanying themselves and playing multiple instruments, not simultaneously, but I think we have within the region of maybe, I'm going to say 10 to 12 instruments.
And they sit on the stage when you arrive, by the way. They are the array of what you're going to get, and they are actually very striking.
They are your chorus girls,
if you like. Look at the shine on that trombone.
So that was another important factor in the writing process, and once I knew what instruments I would have, that helped a great deal. I started initially by writing everything in piano score, and then would bring the songs to rehearsals. We'd learn them, and then we would spend the remaining time seeing how we could. I would call it improvised orchestrating.
Yes.
Because
orchestrating on the spot.
Well, really, which is something I've never done before, and if anything, Giltal has taught me is you have your orchestrations in a good week or two before the workshop, and so it was very exciting in a fun and stressful way to
seat of the pants.
Well, yes, to divvy out, as it were, little fragments and see whether they worked or didn't, and those were things that kept changing up until the night of the preview.
Well, that's interesting, because that also suggests a sense of organic cohesion, ironically, the ability to change.
Well, yeah, and I think that's dependent on a couple of things. I think the cast we have are all actors, first and foremost, but they are all incredible musicians.
First and foremost?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. So not only can they read music to a very, very competent level, but they have memorised the whole thing, and
there's no sheet music
there is no sheet music at all, except for me.
Well, you have that privilege. You wrote it.
No, I know. So they have learnt the score in such a way that it is interchangeable, and should an oboe line need to change to a violin line, which happened back and forth almost daily, it was possible, and that's been a blessing, really, how flexible they have been.
Well, it's interesting you were talking about that, because what you've done is you've reminded me of the fact that amongst the instruments you have is a clarinet, and there's at least one song where the clarinet is played against a piano, which to my ear, and I don't know why this is, but it's always played. I think maybe Vaughan Williams is responsible for this, if he's listening. Unlikely, I think. But to me it sounds culturally, and I'm going to use the word English rather than British. There's a particular sound which to my ear has always been the clarinet over piano, and I've heard it in odd places, even down to people like Flanders and Swan, the great cabaret act, in some of their radio performances, which have been released on one of the rarer albums of their material, from their radio reviews, or farragos as they used to call them. Quite a lot of clarinet against piano, and to me it just I mean, obviously, you know, if you're talking English rather than British, somehow the 50s seems to resonate as well, and that's obviously when they were doing this as well. So I don't know how much of it is time context and how much of it is actual speech marks English sounding music, but I was very much given that feeling and sense at that point.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's in any way relevant to the show, because I don't think it is. It's not about nationality. It's not about anything of that nature. It's just that has a very particular sound in the same, and I recognise it in the same way that I recognise the Sondheimy bits and the Gershwini bits. You know, it really is picking up its resonances and its cultural flavours from all over the place.
Yeah. Well, the clarinet is a very versatile instrument, and it's integrated itself into klezmer bands.
Yes.
We hear it in jazz, we hear it in the symphony orchestra, wind quintets. I mean, there's a lot it can do, and very little it can't.
Yes.
I don't think you can pluck a clarinet.
You can, but you won't get the sound you want.
No. So,
and you can put a duster in it and get to those high, difficult to reach parts of the house. Very long.
Yeah, so it's. I'm not surprised that it gave that impression to you. It's not an abrasive sounding instrument, so maybe there's something about the English sensibility that in its.
That's interesting. Yes.
In its kind of polite register resonated with you.
Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's quite often it's not jazzy. I mean, I know it can be used in jazzy, but the sound I'm referring to here is a kind of lightness. It's kind of funny enough. I think it falls into that school of English light classical music.
Oh yeah, sure.
Which takes us back to Vaughan Williams again, funnily enough.
Yeah.
So maybe that, it is all that kind of I mean, lark ascending is obviously an archetype.
Yeah, and I guess the more accessible parts of William Walton, and
yes,
it has that very.
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah, a rustic feel to it, I think. Kind of a combination of it comes back to this idea of combining vernacular and divine, and the result is something that's very pleasant, hopefully.
Oh, it certainly is that. So in terms of its creativity, we got to the point whereby you were saying, and I thought fascinatingly, that your cast helped inform the creative process, just courtesy of the ranges that offered you. Did it offer you any negative things, though? Are there any things that you really wanted to do that you suddenly realised, well, I can't do it because what I don't have amongst them is a piano accordion player or something?
Gosh, no, not at all. They offered immense amount, so there was very little that was not possible. The one thing that would have been great to have, but it's more logistical in terms of getting up to Edinburgh, would have been a drum kit. And we have a fabulous percussionist who not only plays handheld and pitched and unpitched percussion, well, mainly unpitched in the show, but is a keen drummer. But it just wouldn't have been feasible to have that, as well as a piano and a cello and all
Yeah,
the other.
you've got big instruments in there already.
We do, yeah. But he manages to turn a djembe into all sorts of other unpitched sounds. But the drum kit would have been ideal, especially for the more contemporary kind of bossa nova and gospel numbers. But other than that, they've been pretty perfect. My music isn't, I mean, I don't want to swell my head, but some of my music is complicated.
Yes,
and
it is. It's one of its joys.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Whilst I do have numbers that are decidedly in one time signature, there are songs that change time signature almost every bar and every key, almost every other bar, and they've risen to the challenge incredibly well. And that's been, for someone who's had the fortune of working with conservatoire trained musicians and taken that for granted, and then to go and work with actors who are just as good and even better at doing other things.
Well, as you say, they're actors first.
Well, yeah, they are. But the fact that they can play in 5/8 and then 7/8 and then 6/8 and then go into 3/4 and 2/4 whilst changing key, memorise all of that and act and sing at the same time has been. I mean, it really has. It's proven to me that we are, as people and as an audience, should be better at engaging with more complicated material. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, compared to the stuff that I was learning and the stuff that I write contemporary classical wise, is not as complicated, and that might surprise a theatre going audience, but perhaps I might be too difficult for the theatre audience and too easy for the classical audience, but that's something for critics to worry about.
I think you use the word complicated when you might mean sophisticated.
Oh.
And I would draw from your statement into a different direction, which is, unfortunately, there is a rather wrong, in my opinion, rule of thumb, which engagement can only be found through simplicity. Engagement comes from engagement, and it can be simplistic or non-simplistic.
Yeah.
But we were talking earlier, slightly tongue-in-cheek, about how one improvises an opening number of a musical as one imagines it. But actually, you can start a musical in any way, and you don't have to follow those conventions, you don't have to follow those forms, and you can take it any way you like, and it can be as complicated as this or as simple as that.
Yeah.
If I love pantomime, but I don't want every show to feel like a pantomime. And unfortunately, when you go to the West End, there are a lot of awfully good shows. There's a lot of perfectly average shows. But forgive me. For example, if you go and see Made in Dagenham, it's long gone from London now. It's a show with weaknesses, I'm going to say, but it's not doing anything sophisticated or complicated. It's trying to draw you in purely on the narrative with some songs in it, in my view. Where actually it's a great delight to have here a show which is actually saying, no, let's be interesting, let's be a little bit off the beaten track, considerably off the beaten track, and actually it says members of the public aren't stupid, that some people won't get it, some people won't connect with it, but actually it's all about engaging at a different level. In the same way that television is divided up between ITV and BBC4 and all points in between, and further as well if you find them, but those are the main ones. So is musical theatre, and you seem to be. I think you're more BBC4 than you are ITV2.
Oh God,
it's not saying much, is it? But you know what I mean.
Sure. Well, I really.
By the way, I apologise for being snobby, but I'm just trying to use a sort of shorthand for the different gauges that people have.
No, that's quite all right. Yeah, I really hope that there is a place for musical theatre that has purpose beyond the.
The obvious?
I was going to say the word has gone. The
proscenium arch?
Thank you.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah, I was going to say beyond the proscenium.
Great mime.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and I probably am Brechtian, or in my approach, I definitely am. Augusto Boal is a big influence to me, and his work in Brazil and using theatre as a social force and empowering people.
As it once was here.
Yeah, I think so. Well, and
that died off in about 1958, as far as I can see.
Well, sure, yeah, and I mean, definitely, I think Joan Littlewood is the great British example of that, and people like Sondheim do that on a very personal social level, and I think what I'm doing is really an extension of that in some ways, and what I'm doing is branching it out so that the themes discussed and the people that you're seeing on stage, much like Edward Albee, and live on in you past the experience and inform how you live the rest of your life, I think.
Which is almost where we came in on this, in fact.
Yeah.
We were talking about interpretive performance. So I'm going to ask you two final questions. One
Sure.
is a ridiculous and stupid one, and one is really important for the coarse world of business.
Mm-hmm.
So let's have the stupid one first. There are 5 performers.
Yep.
And you. So
And me.
you are your 6th.
I don't sing.
No, but you play beautifully.
Thank you.
As I'd expect, as it's your music. But there's one number where you give up your seat against the piano.
Yeah, I do.
And the gentleman who I assume is your percussionist
He is.
plays the piano for that piece.
Yeah.
What's the purpose of that?
Oh, well,
It's a simple question.
The rehearsal process has been very quick, and it was my intention that I wouldn't be playing the piano for every number. Realistically, there are only 2 in which I need to play the piano. That's because everyone else is playing another instrument.
There are only so many hands in the room.
Well, exactly, and so it's purely me giving away all of my responsibility, which is the ideal. That's the paradigm, and again would have been ideal with a 6th cast member to take over my role. But as it happens, we don't have that, so I'm stepping in as and when. Yes, so I have a great 3-minute break in between that number where I get to perch on the floor
And rest your hands.
Yes, exactly. So that's that.
Fine, that was a simple question, but I noticed it as an audience member, obviously,
Oh, dear.
because I know you as well. I was thinking, oh, that's interesting. They swap around, as they do, everyone's using different instruments, but it was the only time I observed it.
Yes.
And I thought, that's interesting. The piano is not quite playing the same role as the other instruments. There's also I should just say it for people who are ticking off the instruments as we relate them, there's a mandolin, isn't there, as well?
There is a mandolin.
Which is a lovely looking thing as well. And my second question, which I say is the coarse, harsh world of trying to get people to see it. How can people see it? You see, it's quite a basic question, isn't it?
You can see World in Progress at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. We are there from the 13th till the 25th of August. We have one night off. I believe that's the 19th, but you can check on the Edinburgh Fringe website for that. Yes, that's all you need to know. We're on at 10:15 at night, so don't bring the kiddies.
There's no inappropriate behaviour or anything in the show. It's just a bit late.
Oh no,
Yeah,
it's
fine.
very, very wholesome.
It's a nice central venue as well.
It is, yeah. We are just off the Mile. We're on North Bridge.
Yeah, but you are literally 1 minute away from the Royal Mile. I consider you to be right in the heart of the business. Very
Yes.
easy to go to.
So no
It's a
excuses.
venue I go to a lot.
Oh, great. Yes, and you can find us on... So our theatre company is called Merde Theatre.
I won't ask because I know.
Good, good. I'm sure your listeners do too.
Yes, I'm sure they do.
But we are on Twitter, we're on Facebook and Instagram, and you can keep up to date with us there.
But of course, for Edinburgh's purposes, as you say, the best way of finding out all these details are on the Edinburgh Fringe website.
Indeed they are, yes.
Perfect. Well, Colm, thank you so much. I've seen the show.
You have?
And I enjoyed it a great deal in its preview, to the point where I'm going to come and see it again in Edinburgh.
You are a gent.
Well, you're very kind, but actually you are the one who's done all the work. All you've done is write something sufficiently engaging that I want to go and see it, and also hear more, because I'm entranced by the idea that, as I say, the score is its selling point above all else. I mean, I liked it all, but I think the musical scope and scape that you've offered are very much to my kind of sensibility. So I'm keen to hear those extra new songs and just add a little bit more to my own. I shall take it home and dream upon it.
Oh, gosh, thank you so much.
So good luck, and I'll see you up in the fine city of Edinburgh.
Can't wait.
Well, there we are. That's Colm Molloy, and any time spent in his company is time well spent. And of course you can do so in the more theatrical sense of that by joining him in his show in the audience of World in Progress. It's on at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe between the 13th and the 25th of August, with the exception of the 19th, the day off. It starts at 10:20 in the evening and lasts for 50 minutes, and you can see it at the venue known as the Space on North Bridge, which is literally, as I've said, 1 minute away from the Royal Mile, absolutely in the heart of Edinburgh City. Very easy to get to. And if you're the kind of person who likes a show that is both sensuous but also challenging or demanding in the sense of you need to do some interpretation, it's not served up to you all on a plate, then World in Progress is the show for you. But World in Progress is not by any means the only musical up in Edinburgh this year. In previous episodes you've heard the occasional blog entries of our good friend David Herzog about Chwedl, Tales from Wales, which is the show that he's taking up to the festival between the 23rd and the 27th of August. Now, if you look online at the Ed Fringe website, you'll see it's been described in the following way. A fun-filled 45-minute romp through ancient fairy tales and folklore legends from Wales. Delve deep into the stories, myths and language and delicious cultural intricacies that make Wales the beautiful and mysterious place it is. Well, with the show just about to open and development more or less finished, that vital step between pre-production and actual production, let's hear the last of David's always interesting Chwedl blogs. Musical Talk.
Hello, Musical Talkers. Today's entry is going to be a short one. I've already had the chance to fill you in on the premise of Chwedl, and you can catch up with more of our day-to-day exploits on Facebook at Chwedl Fairytales from Wales, and we now also have a Twitter and Instagram handle for good measure as well. There's lots of exciting stuff happening as we are quickly approaching our Edinburgh run from the 23rd to the 27th of August, and of course the Festival Fringe itself is now off and running as we speak. So since we're getting down to the wire of our rehearsals and getting started with all of our plans for arriving in Edinburgh and getting our tech rehearsals sorted out, getting ramped up for flyering on the Royal Mile, and getting the show up and onto its feet at PQA venues, today what we're going to do is whet your appetites with a lovely and entertaining interview I did with two of our wonderful cast members, the first of which being Ms. Daniela May, who is playing our lead character of Gwen, and also Ms. April Herzog, yes relation, who is playing several characters, of which she's going to tell you about here in just a moment. Back to North Wales we go, friends. Keep your arms and legs inside the car at all times.
My name's April. I'm the baker and the lady of the lake and a Tulworth Teg and a goat.
Lovely.
I'm Daniela and I'm playing Gwen. And that is it, just Gwen.
Hello, folks, and thanks for having us on the program. As always, we are coming to you live from a genuine Welsh pub. But of course, since this is an audio podcast, you're just going to have to take my word for that. I am here talking to a couple of fellow members of my creative team for Chwedl Fairytales from Wales. And Daniela, let's start with you since you're playing the lead, the fair Gwen. Could you tell us a little bit about the character that you play in the piece, please?
So, Gwen is basically a young child of indefinite age, and she's just led kind of a sheltered life. So she's been only in the cottage with her grandfather her entire life, and then her grandfather dies and she ventures out into the world. So it's a little bit about her coming of age kind of thing along the lines, and also with kind of involvement in the story. So she gets a little bit wiser as the story goes on, but she's a bit naive, a bit green.
What are your favorite parts about playing this character so far?
She's really fun because she is so naive. There's just a nice innocence to her. She's energetic, and that childlike quality of that eagerness to just do everything and get it done now. So yeah, that's really fun to play.
What's been the hardest part about playing her so far?
Probably just trying to stay energetic for the whole time.
Yeah.
Especially in some of the more darker scenes, it's trying to find the light within that as well, so that you get the balance right, because it's not all just a kind of jokey and lightheartedness, but also that you don't want her to go quite dark because she is a child and you still want the fun within it. So yeah, it's just finding that balance in some of those scenes, I think.
We're going to be going up to Edinburgh, of course, in a couple of weeks' time, and this is your first time going to Edinburgh for the Fringe, is it not?
It is.
What are you most looking forward to?
I'm most looking forward to everything because I don't really know what to expect. I've had a lot of friends do it. A lot of friends have told me that I have to do it. So yeah, I'm excited for the opportunity to perform, but also excited to just go and see lots of stuff while I'm up there as well. Just get the full experience and hopefully get some audience members in to see what we produce because I'm really getting quite proud of what we've done here in Wales.
Cool, thank you very much. Now, April, tell us a bit about some of the characters that you play in the piece, please.
Well, I play Madame Baker, as Gwen calls me. She was born and raised in Blaenau Festiniog. I think there's a little more than meets the eye to the baker. I think she knows more than she's letting on. She's a joyful character, quite strict. Definitely takes a liking to Gwen when she comes along. I think wants to sort of mother her a little bit.
Interesting. Do you think so? You think she likes Gwen?
Oh yeah, I think she likes Gwen. I mean, the baker definitely is used to getting her own way. She runs her own bakery. She sells her own bread. She's in charge, you know. So yeah, that's the baker. She's very Welsh.
What makes her very Welsh?
My excellent accent.
Yeah.
My excellent
Do have
accent.
a good accent.
Except on the odd occasion when it's a little bit not Welsh, but I'll leave that to the audience to decide if I do slip up on the night what accent.
We don't know what she's
I'm
talking
doing.
about, do we?
Not at all. And then there's Lady of the Lake, who is... I think she's been left on her own a little too long in that lake. She's a little bit haughty. She definitely thinks a lot of herself. She thinks she's forgotten how to interact properly with human beings. She thinks a lot of herself. She's only had herself in her mirror as company for such a very long time. She also knows an awful lot. I think this is something that comes up a lot with the characters that Gwen meets. I think they all know more than they're letting on. The Tylwyth Teg, of course, as part of the ensemble. I play one of the fairies. And then my favourite character, the goat.
Oh, lovely. We might have to hear a bit more about the goat here in just a second. But the Lady of the Lake, I mean, of all the characters that we have written about in this show, I'm guessing the Lady of the Lake is probably going to be the one that people know the most if they're super into mythology and things like that, because the Lady of the Lake is part of the King Arthur stories and things like that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about more? You mentioned being very entranced by her own image in the mirror and things like that.
That sort of just came out in rehearsal. We weren't really sure who the Lady of the Lake was and what her deal was. There are so many different stories around the Lady of the Lake, how she got to be there, different stories about her relationship with Excalibur, with this sword. So we tried lots of things in rehearsal where Daniela, playing Gwen, had the sword but was sort of distracted as Gwen and wouldn't give it to me. So we sort of played with that idea of the Lady of the Lake trying to get hold of the sword. We didn't use that in the end, but it was an interesting exercise that I think helped inform how we were going to play this character.
And tell us about the goat.
The goat's called Lucy. She is a sheep playing a goat in this play, so she's an actor just like the
How
rest
versatile.
of us. She's very versatile. So Lucy is a hand puppet.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay, that makes much more sense. I feared I was losing control of this interview. We can't wait to see both of you and the goat in the show as well. Tell us what you're most looking forward to, April, at this year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe.
I'm really, really, really looking forward to seeing some of our friends up there who are performing, and just the whole buzz of the Fringe, and seeing how it's changed as well, because the last time I was there was when you were performing, David, about 10 years ago. The last time I was there performing was maybe about 12 years ago, and social media wasn't really a thing then. I mean, it was starting up, but Facebook certainly wasn't really a thing yet. Twitter, I don't know if that was around. So the way that you advertise now at the Fringe is completely different. So I went to a marketing seminar run by the lovely people up at the Fringe the other day online, and that was really, really interesting and really useful, just looking at how to use social media, how to use Facebook, how to use Twitter, how to use Instagram, and they were all things that I didn't have to think about 12 years ago when I went up there. So it'll be interesting to see how that's kind of changed.
Friends, this is my absolute last chance to tell you to buy your tickets now for Chwedl, Fairytales from Wales. Our pre-sales are actually doing very, very well at the moment, which is extremely encouraging, so buy your tickets as soon as you can, please. And you can do so, as always, on the Fringe website. It's running from the 23rd of August until the 27th at PQA venues just off the Royal Mile. Next time you hear my voice, listeners, will be from the Fringe itself. If you do get a chance to come along and see the show, please do make yourselves known, say hey, and I will be covering Chwedl live from the Fringe as best as I can, and also any other shows that I might be lucky enough to see, presuming that I can pull myself away from rehearsals and flying at any point. So I will hopefully see you there, listeners. On a sadder note, just before we go, friends, I just wanted to pay tribute to 2 Broadway performers who have gone to their rest recently. The first being Gary Beach, who listeners will most likely know from being an original cast member of shows like The Producers and Beauty and the Beast. He passed away just recently, back in July. And the second hit a bit closer to home for me, and this was the passing of Trent Armand Kendall. Though he's not much of a household name in the theater world here in Britain, he is certainly well known and loved in New York and the Broadway community itself. He is known for being a part of many shows, but particularly for being in the original cast of Bat Boy the Musical, as well as being involved in productions of Five Guys Named Moe, Cats, and also the most recent revival of Into the Woods that starred Vanessa Williams, just to name a few. At the time of recording, his birthday would have been today, August the 5th. I was lucky enough to meet Trent back when I was researching my master's thesis, and we kept in touch over the years. I was hoping to have him on the program to discuss his marvelous career in musical theater, but sadly that never came to fruition. Please remember both of these extremely talented men who will be greatly missed. Treat yourselves to some of their music right now, both of which can be found on YouTube and other music mediums. Thanks again for having me on the program. As always, Musical Talkers, follow me on Twitter at DavidHerzog06 and follow Chwedl on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter as well. Back to you, Thos.
Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. And there we are. David Herzog there, telling us all about Chwedl, Tales from Wales. And if you want to see it, it's on between the 23rd and the 27th of August, which is very much the last week of the entire Festival Fringe. And it's on 1 o'clock in the afternoon at the PQA venues. That's the Pauline Quirk Academy venues, which is at Riddles Court, which is directly off the Royal Mile, once again right in the heart of the city. And of course, there are so many other shows up in Edinburgh. They're not all musical theatre, of course. And of course, many people quite mistakenly believe that the Festival Fringe is really all about comedy. Well, comedy is an important part of that. But so is drama, so is musical theatre, so are concerts, so is art, installation, you name it, they have it. If you have a single cultural bone in your body, you will find something to enjoy at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. A few highlights, and this is an almost random selection. There is a very rare chance to see The Frogs by Stephen Sondheim, and rather delightfully, that's being performed in the Theatre Bath Bus in the Meadows. Quite an interesting venue for that, I think. There's a very excellent version of The Drowsy Chaperone, which is an old favourite, of course. There's an interesting looking musical theatre installation called Drive-By Shooting, which is just 15 minutes at Summer Hall in the Terrace. There's an improvised pantomime at Paradise in the Vault. The Royal Scottish Conservatoire is serving up Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. And if you want an example of how pop will ultimately eat itself, there's a musical in the most meta tradition called Ed Fringe, the musical, which I'm rather hoping will identify some of the tropes that those of us who go to the Fringe every year have spotted. There's a man called David Williams Hughes who's putting on what can only be described as an Elizabethan musical, with traditional Elizabethan music called, and get this, Elizabethan. That's at the Space at Surgeons Hall. Our old friend Finn Anderson has a very well-received musical called Legacy, a mother's song, and you can see that at the Assembly Hall. There's even a musical about Alexander Fleming and the discovery of penicillin called The Mould That Changed the World. Other well-known shows? Well, the House of Blakewell have got Thor and Loki. Jason Robert Brown's 13, the coming-of-age musical, is available. You can see a musicalised version of Oscar Wilde's The Canterville Ghost. And just a few more, and this, as I say, is completely random, this list. There are plenty more musicals than those which I'm picking out. There's Dogfight at the Space at Venue 45, and there's a welcome return of Buried, which was so good last year, and also Six, the musical about the 6 wives of Henry VIII, which did tremendously well last year and which I didn't get to see. I'm going to be making up for that this year. But I think the most welcome return for me this year is a show that I failed to see 2 or 3 years ago, which Michael Gordon Shapiro loved and raved about to me. I then subsequently heard 1 or 2 of the songs and thought I had missed a very great show here. Well, I now won't be able to say that because the House of Edgar, a musical about the legacy of Edgar Allan Poe, has, I'm delighted to say, returned to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. You can see it at Greenside at Nicholson Square, which is equidistant between the Pleasance Courtyard and Bristow Square, where the Gilded Balloon Teviot is, and also the Pleasance Dome, and that's on at 11:10 in the evening. Do try and catch the House of Edgar and all the shows I've mentioned, and indeed all the shows I've not mentioned, if you get the chance to go to Edinburgh this year. We'll be back again very soon with another preview episode of things you can see at the Festival Fringe, but to sign us out for today, let's hear one song from the House of Edgar. I must say, it's one of my favourites, and it's one of the songs that made me think this is a show I really have to see. I hope it will have the same effect upon you. But for the time being, goodbye.
I am dreadfully nervous, but I am not mad. Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story.
When I first had the faintest of foulest of thoughts, unfeasible to say, but once lodged in the back of my restless brain, it would haunt me night and day. The old man never harmed no man, but it was by his hand that I thrived. Yet I took delight in the right to ensure that by night he would no longer survive.
He had never wronged me, he had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold.
Now this is the point, you fancy me mad. You will not judge if you saw how I planned. Madmen know nothing, they know not a jot. Nervous I may be, but a madman I'm not. Yes, manic I may be, but a madman I'm not. So for 7 nights by lantern light I hid outside his door, and the time was spent to sharpen senses, but fearless, nervous of the nearness of the task that I perform. Lantern aloft, I slowly pushed the lonely door aside. With disbelief I saw him wake from his sleep, his eyelids peeled back wide. Now this is the point, you fancy me mad. You would not judge if you saw how I planned. Madmen know nothing, they know not a jot. Nervous I may be, but a madman I'm not. Yes, manic I may be, but a madman I'm not. Subduing my pride, I knelt down by the side and gazed upon the source of my rage, my pain, of my fear and disdain, of an evil cold and coarse. From his mouth came too late to unseal his fate a single final cry, as with his last living look he fixed me with that pale blue vulture's eye. His pulse rang like a drum beat of thudding bass and marching snare, and it faded into the distance as I entered the vulture's glare. The night waned, and I worked hastily but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then tore up 3 planks from the flooring and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye,
not even his, could have detected anything wrong. As the bell sounded the hour, I heard a knocking at the door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I to fear? There entered 3 men. Officers of the police who said they had heard a shriek. I told them the old man was away in the country and bade they search his house well.
Now this is the point, you fancy me mad. You would not judge if you saw how I... Like a pocket watching cotton, the softest ticking caught my ear, and it rose like a double-time bass drum beat, marching ever near. And like a disease of pained unease took root deep in my gut. It seeped and spread and oozed and wept like a foul and festering cut. As it rose running red like cloyed clotting blood blubbing back at the back of my throat, it mixed with the deafening dead man's pulse to produce a pounding note. The chaotic chord crescendo, it was the devil's art. I fell to my knees before the police, overwhelmed by his telltale heart.
This episode of Musical Talk, presented by Thos Ribbits and David Herzog, and edited by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2018, except for the songs where the copyright remains with the original creators, and my thanks to them for allowing me to play their songs in this programme. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at MusicalTalk Thos. Well, you know the kind of thing. We'll start in the...
I didn't know whether to prepare any notes or not, but I didn't. So I'll see what happens.
You wouldn't for a conversation. So,
No, I wouldn't.
yeah. But of course, you know the usual thing. If we get anywhere and you think
Wrong.
yes, or I'd rather that bit wasn't there, or
Oh, yeah,
we'll,
sure.
we'll take it out. Don't worry.
All right.
Just say. Do you want to give me a quick conversational level?
Hello there, my name is Colm Molloy, and you're listening to Musical Talk. Today, my guest is the wonderful Thos Ribbits.
Hello. That's very good. Thank you.
I've written a musical on the back of a napkin. Quite short.
I'll leave it there. Right. Oh well,
Double-sided.
Unexpected episode. Yes. Right. So, if you're happy, we'll just start.
Sure. And I wanted in some way to engage an audience that was conscious of what was going on, but also reminding them that everything we do in the grand scheme of the thing, so we're talking universally or at the solar system, is all in vain. It might come as a sobering realization for some people, or it might come as, in some ways, quite a liberating feeling that everything we do is irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. I mean,
So
to
Whitney
me,
Houston was wrong. Or was that Brian May? Who sang "Everything I Do It for You"? That was Brian.
it's one for your listeners. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Some pop singer, Brian Adams. Maybe that was him. Well, I apologise now. Please don't write in. But whoever it was,
Oh, I want to know. Do write in, please.
I'll give you your email address. So, do you mind going back? Because that was because I didn't know. I now think it's Brian Adams rather than. I'm not going to interrupt with a bad joke.
No. If it's wrong.
Do you mind just going back and giving the line of as far as you can? You said everything we do is fundamentally futile, so that's the sentence we need to bring up again.
Yes.
Did it offer you any negative things, though? Are there any things that you really wanted to do that you suddenly realised, well, I can't do it because what I don't have amongst them is a piano accordion player or something?
No, not very little at all. God, that doesn't make any sense at all.
You can use a new sentence there if you like, and I'll cut it out.
Thank you. Let me think first.
Not very little at all.
Not very little at all.
It's lovely, actually. I'm going to write that down.
No, please don't.